That is the truth. And the young people who all vote for these socialist idiots and the Greens who destroy everything, they need to be told that the socialist regimes will suppress freedom. People have less freedom and they have less economic prosperity. That is the fact. I have friends who are well informed. They be and also well connected to the State Department. They think the US wants war. Specifically the neocons. And so you may wish to have, as an asset holder, some assets in Latin America, because the war theater is unlikely to be in Latin America. Unlikely. But it could happen, but not very likely. My major theme for the last 200 years has been that investors should own precious metals. This is the major theme, because you cannot trust central bankers and you cannot trust democratically elected governments. All of them, without any exception, all of them print money sooner or later.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today's guest is Marc Faber, renowned investor, author, and editor of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom Report. Marc, thanks so much for carving out the time today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, we've got obviously a lot of stuff going on around the world. Would love to hear your current macro take pertaining to the global economy, financial markets, and even geopolitics for that matter.
Yes. How many hours do I have to talk about it? But I mean, if you ask me about the global macroeconomics, obviously the economy globally is not very strong. It's not in a strong expansionary mode. And different countries are moving in different rhythm of expansion or contraction. I think China and some countries in Asia are sort of close to the low of the cycle, of the business cycle, and are likely to expand, whereas, say, the United States is close to a cyclical and probably secular high, and therefore less attractive. So I think we have to go country by country and discuss the fundamentals of each country. And then within countries, there are stocks that are very expensive, and then there are stocks that are reasonably priced. So again, we would have to define exactly what we are discussing. In more recent years, as you know, money has flown mostly into index funds, and stock selection or active management has been less important than indexing and money flowing into the index space. But I think this is going to change. And I think that already for the last 6 months, we have a lot of stock specific themes that have worked out very well, whereas the indices haven't done very well, certainly not in the US. Now, some indices, they were very depressed, say like European indices or Asian and Latin American. They have performed reasonably well as the currency, because over the last few years, the US dollar has been very strong, but the election of Mr. Trump was not favorable for the US dollar, aside from other things that are not particularly favorable. So the markets, say European markets, part of the appreciation in 2025 is the currency strength vis-a-vis the US dollar. The euro is up more than 15% against the US dollar.
As it relates to
So this is my
continue the
macro theme. I mean, we have to be very specific and talk about sectors and not just the whole picture, because the whole picture doesn't look particularly attractive. If you showed me the picture of the world, I wouldn't say that this is a conducive environment for stocks to perform particularly well.
Well, perhaps we could start off in your neck of the woods over in Asia. Where do you see things at right now?
I beg your pardon?
Oh, as it relates to where you are, where do you see things at right now over in Asia, where you're at?
Well, I mean, my major theme for the last 200 years has been that investors should own precious metals. This is the major theme because you cannot trust central bankers and you cannot trust democratically elected governments that all of them, without any exception, all of them print money sooner or later. Now, there are exceptions like Milei in Argentina that for a while they maintain fiscal and monetary discipline, but eventually the democratically elected governments, they all go and print money and have large fiscal deficits because in order to get elected, they have to promise people something that they cannot pay for, basically. So they borrow money and then they ask the central bank to print money. And in this environment, people need to own some precious metals because it can't be printed. Now, some young people will tell me, well, it's much better to own bitcoins and cryptocurrencies. Perhaps, I doubt it, but perhaps. Uh, but it's not a proven store of value. Whereas gold and silver, I can say, going back to the time of Egypt or Babylon, it's a proven store of value.
I remember you mentioning on the Financial Sense podcast with, I think his name's Jim, that you'd spoken to a lot of younger investors and a lot of them are trying to trade crypto. They're not into metals or things of that nature. Just a trend that you're seeing in recent years in instead of other markets and things that people might be interested in, so to speak. As it relates to over in, well, I should say, I also remember you referencing something related to platinum being something that you feel doesn't receive enough attention. Could you unpack that?
Well, as you know, there are several precious metals, uh, gold, silver, platinum, to some extent palladium. Uh, then they move with different intensity. So gold is relatively expensive compared to, say, silver and platinum. And by the way, gold is very expensive compared to, say, oil or compared to wheat, soybeans, corn, and so forth. So recently, platinum was at 122 years low relative to gold. This is very unusual because platinum trades around the price of gold. Sometimes it is more expensive than the price of gold or higher than the price of gold, and sometimes it trades at a discount. But the current discount is unusually wide. In other words, the price of gold is over 3,000, and 2 months ago, platinum was below 1,000. So compared to, say, times when platinum is more expensive than gold, it was unusually cheap. And that's why I wrote several reports highlighting the opportunity in platinum, which I think still exists. I mean, I think within a year or 2 years, we could have a platinum price that is higher than the gold price. And
Could
I've written
okay,
about the fact that
no, go ahead,
people
please.
who missed the bull market in gold, because they always say, oh, it doesn't go up and it's old fashioned and so forth, that these people, they have an opportunity in the platinum market because it hadn't moved since 2015, whereas gold has gone up a lot over the last few years. But I'm always surprised how reluctant individuals are to own gold, basically. I remember a time when people speculated 24 hours a day in gold and silver during the 1970s, but after that, never again. And if you go to a party or to go to a social event, and people talk about their investments and they talk about Nvidia and Tesla and the Mac 7 stocks and so forth. And then you ask them, well, do you own any gold? And then maybe the wives say, yes, we own some gold. We own some jewelry, or we inherited a few coins from our grandparents. But it's ever very seldom that someone would say, I have 20% of my assets in gold. It's very seldom. Also, central banks, they usually have very little in gold. Now they're accumulating. But I'm just saying, to find an individual who will tell you, oh, I have 30% of my money, or 20% of my money, or 50% of my money in gold is most unusual. Most unusual. And the
How much
interest
do
is
you
not
feel?
particularly high because we can measure how much money flows into ETFs. And the most popular ETFs, like for high tech and so forth, they have large inflows of money. But for gold ETFs, no, they're selling them. The asset values of gold ETFs hasn't gone up. So we're not yet in a bubble stage.
Where else are you finding opportunities? And I'll also mention, I have down in my notes that you see broad commodities are deeply undervalued relative to stocks, bonds, and real estate. Could you dive into that?
Yes, and I mean, a major theme of mine for the last 12 months has been that emerging markets and European markets were very cheap relative to the US. And in particular, I mean, I've lived in Hong Kong for 30 years, between 1973 and year 2000, and I still have an office in Hong Kong, and I still visit Hong Kong and so forth. I was well known as a super bear about Hong Kong. And I don't want to go into the details now, but I've written a book about the rise and the fall of cities in the world, in history. And my sense was that Hong Kong would suffer as a result of the increased competition from China and Chinese cities. But there were other reasons for not being particularly optimistic about Hong Kong. But anyway, now, for the last 6 months or so, I've been advising people to buy Hong Kong shares and property stocks specifically because the property shares in Hong Kong, they sell at something like a 50% or more discount to the asset value. Now, the asset value is likely to go down, but is not going to go down by another 50% or so. You understand? I think the market is a discounting mechanism. It discounts good prospects or improving fundamentals, and it discounts deteriorating fundamentals. And then markets move into extreme where they over discount the favorable prospects and over discount the negative factors. In Hong Kong, thanks to the Western media, I must point out, that is trashing China and Hong Kong on every occasion, because the media in the Western world is biased and is anti-China and anti-developing world, without any question. They're also
Mhm.
anti-Trump. Not that he's a brilliant individual intellectually, but at least he's doing something. In my view, he's
Yeah,
doing too much. But I'm just saying, the media, when China was booming 10 years ago, they all went to China and they wrote these beautiful books and reports and articles about China. And more recently, when the Western powers, specifically the US and specifically the CIA related and its affiliates, funded and organized a demonstration against China in Hong Kong because they wanted to put down China. Anyway, these demonstrations, they failed very badly. And since then, the media is very much against Hong Kong. And so they've been writing negative articles about Hong Kong for the last 5 years. But everybody who has any brains, he travels to Hong Kong or to Singapore or to any other Asian city. He has to say that it's very safe to walk around Asia, whereas it's not very safe to walk around American cities and European cities anymore.
as it relates to the West and over in Asia, of course, and obviously Asia, particularly China, has done well in terms of its growth and its position in the world, if you will, even though it has its own challenges internally. Others have speculated that China might be kind of like the next New York in the 2030s. The West will just kind of gradually fade. Where do you kind of see all that shaking out, Mark?
Well, I mean, if you ask me about China, it's very clear that uh, the growth phase of, say, 7 to 12% per annum, this is over. It's not going to come back because the population is no longer growing, it's actually contracting. And so, and the country, each country that joins the capitalistic system, they have a tremendous growth phase until they reach middle income status within countries in the world. And after that, their growth rate slows down. You want strong growth, you go, say, to the Middle East and you go to India. These countries, they can grow very strongly for a while, but they will also hit a speed bump. Eventually, all countries slow down, and you're lucky if you can grow at, say, 4 or 5% per annum. But 4 or 5% per annum is very strong growth in the long run. You understand? If China can grow at 4 to 5% per annum and the population doesn't go up, then the per capita incomes increase. This is a very important point to consider.
I see. And then wanted to get your thoughts on the West, where you see things, whether as it relates to obviously the U.S., Canada, Europe, where you see their direction headed.
Well, in my opinion, the West is is not going to grow much, and the standards of living of the typical household, I'm not talking about the rich people, the wealthy people, uh, they do well in monetary inflation. And we are in an environment of monetary inflation. So for now, the Western world is is plagued by essentially declining standards of living of average people. It's not growing, but the rich people are growing. That's why the stock market is doing quite well, because money printing is obviously favoring the asset holders. You understand? I mean, I don't know what your financial position is, but say mine, I'm an asset holder because I own properties and I own stocks and so forth. And in monetary inflation periods, this is favorable for me. And in particular, in the last few years, as you know, interest rates went up. So as interest rates went up, I, as an asset holder, I own deposits and bonds and so on. Then I get on my money higher and higher interest rates. Whereas poor people, they have borrowings, and they suffer very badly because their borrowing cost to buy a house or to buy anything, a car, is going up. And that's why, if you look at the housing market, you have a bull market in homes in the US amidst less and less demand because affordability is going down, because a typical household, they have to borrow money to buy houses. And as interest rates went up, they got squeezed. Affordability in the US is at an all-time low.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've seen. I mean, I'm out here in California. I've seen prices shoot up here quite a bit. Um, Wanted to ask about your own kind of portfolio as it relates to how much you allocate. I know you mentioned real estate. Certain stocks, presumably metals. You know,
Consistent asset allocation. I keep essentially, or I tell people what you want to do in life. I know people like Bill Gates, they had a very concentrated portfolio. They owned one stock essentially for most of their lives, or Jeff Bezos, and they've done very well. But I'm a portfolio manager and I look after my assets, and I don't need to take huge risks because I don't need a private plane and so forth. So I have a diversified portfolio consisting of 25% equities, 25% bonds and cash, 25% real estate, and 25% precious metals. And now it could be that in 1 year something becomes a bit bigger, but I maintain this strict discipline of not overweighting something when it goes up and not underweighting something when it goes down. So, with that asset allocation, so far, I've slept reasonably well.
and as it relates to the markets and things of that nature, I have down that you see Latin America as being very much a positive with emerging markets, both for return and as a hedge against global war. Can you dive into that for us?
Yes, because of time constraints, I cannot go and explain the whole story about geopolitics. But basically, if you look at the world, uh, since the breakdown of the Berlin Wall, essentially, I define that as it wasn't a turning point, but it was a milestone within a turning point where countries that were socialists and communists finally realized that socialism and communism is a disaster for economic growth and for prosperity and for the happiness of people. I'm emphasizing this because young people, they believe in socialism. They go and vote for socialists who are mayors and politicians and judges and so forth. No, it doesn't work. I've seen the socialist countries already when I was ski racing in the Swiss team in the 50s and 60s. We went to Eastern Europe. I could see it. And then I started to travel to communist countries in the 60s regularly. And I saw the complete disaster it was. And the moment these countries went from socialism and communism to a market economy and to capitalism, they flourished. Flourished. That is the truth. And the young people who all vote for these socialist idiots and the Greens who destroy everything, they need to be told that the socialist regimes will suppress freedom. People have less freedom and they have less economic prosperity. That is the fact. And the moment countries move to the right, to more market oriented principles, their economic system flourishes. And this happened in China, in Vietnam, in Russia, in Eastern Europe, everywhere. It's all very well documented, but the young people seemingly don't read anymore, and they go and vote for the socialists. This is something I will never understand in my in my life. That having experienced socialism and the disastrous consequences, that the young people today in the Western world can go and vote for socialist politicians. And the problem is that the right wing politicians are also half baked socialists, and the rich people, they make so much money out of the socialists because an inherent characteristic of socialism is corruption. So the rich people, they like the socialists, they can pay them off.
Well, sounds pretty spooky. I mean, I know I obviously saw, as I'm sure you did, that New York mayoral candidate, who's a socialist. So
Yes, wonderful. New York becoming a socialist republic. Anyway, it's nice to talk to you, but
yeah, absolutely.
I like Latin America because in the geopolitical environment we are finding ourselves, the pressure points for war are going to be somewhere in the Middle East, somewhere in the divide between Eastern Europe and Russia, and potentially in Asia between the US and its allies, Japan and South Korea and China. And so you may wish to have, as an asset holder, some assets in Latin America because the war theater is unlikely to be in Latin America. Unlikely. But it could happen, but not very likely.
Do you see? I mean, some have speculated that we are already in kind of a global war, but do you see things heating up more? And if so, and if there is a full-on kind of what they say, kinetic war, do you see who do you see coming out on top, if you will?
The answer is I do not know. But I have friends who are well informed. They be and also well connected to the State Department. They think the US wants war, specifically the neocons. And then I don't know. The Chinese are not warlike. They want to have more influence, and they need to be sure. The Chinese depend on raw materials coming from Brazil to China, from Australia to China, and oil from the Middle East to China. They want to make sure that they have access to these resources. And that may lead to tensions with the US, who wants to control Asia. China doesn't have military bases all over the world. The US has. It's the joke. The US accuses China to be belligerent, and also to Russia. But these countries, they don't have military bases all over the world. But the US has.
No, that's very true. That's very true.
The US is
Yeah,
not very good at being self-critical. That is not
no, you're right.
that's not the forte of the US.
No, very true. You know, I've come a long ways in my journey. I was in the Navy in another life, and had never, really ventured out, so to speak, or seen the perspective that the world has on the U.S. And yeah, it is, effectively an empire. And there's been a lot of stuff that the U.S. has done that you know isn't good. So not to sound all anti-U.S., but yeah, no, it's a pretty hairy situation out there. I know we only have so much time, Mark, but I wanted to ask you, what keeps you up at night aside from a WW3 or a market crash?
I beg your pardon?
Oh, I'm sorry. What keeps you up at night?
Well, what keeps me up at night is they told me, various scientists and doctors and programs on TV, they said, in old age, you have to start something new. So I started to play snooker because it's not very dangerous. I have a dangerous occupation, which is uh, riding motorcycles, racing bikes. And so at night, at say 2 o'clock, when the market is about to close, or at 3, I go to bars where you can play snooker, or we call it pool. And I play pool until say 5, 6, 7 in the morning, and then I go home. So I'm occupied playing pool. That keeps me up at night, and drinking beer. And I don't drink hard liquor when I'm on the way outside because I drive the bikes. But when I go home, what keeps me awake is whiskey and cognac. And then I like to watch old Western movies. And then after the Western movies, I go to sleep.
You watch the old spaghetti westerns?
Yes, the spaghetti is more action condensed. But say there are some great American movies like Rio Bravo. A friend of mine attracted me to the movie, and I've seen it several times since then. This is probably the best Western movie that was ever made.
Okay, so you
But
said
of
it was
course, I
called
also
Real
like the
Bravo.
Sergio Leone movies like Once Upon a Time in the West, and The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. You have a busy day, and the market will open up now in about an hour. So, no, sorry, in about 20 minutes. So, I have to be ready.
Oh, absolutely. I'll let you go. How can people learn more about you and get in touch, Mark?
Well, I'm not sure they should learn more about me, but if they want to, let's say, have a website called gloomboomdoom.com, all in one word. I repeat, gloomboomdoom, all in one word.
Awesome. All right, Mark. Well, hey, I'll let you go. Thanks for carving out the time. Take care.
Thank you, and thank you for your time, and all the best to you and your viewers and listeners. It's going to be a volatile world, that I can tell you. You could buy a portfolio of whatever. In a week, it could be up 10% and it could be down 10%. And what has happened recently is interesting because it relates to monetary inflation. In nominal terms, stocks did not go down much. They're at essentially an all-time high. But the dollar has gone down. So in real terms, if I measure, say, stock prices compared to gold, or stock price I measure, say, in euros, they've gone down a lot. There are lots of things that are very interesting that are happening now. And I think, I don't want to advertise, but I think my report offers uh, inexpensive economic and financial lessons.
Love it. All right, Mark. Well, I'll let you go. You take care. Have a great weekend.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye. Quick ask. Over half of you who watch the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you've enjoyed the show, you're finding value in it, subscribing is really the best way to support the channel. It's, of course, free. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it lets the algorithm know that this content matters. And of course, my commitment to you is going to be that I'm going to continue to bring on great guests, refine those questions. And of course, I'm always receptive to your feedback. If there's certain people that you'd like to have on, or certain questions, or this, that, and the other that you'd like to have as part of the show going forward, things of that nature, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to access. Anyhow, that's my commitment to you. If you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. Thanks.